So there are very formal stages to negotiation. We do have, as Bernie was saying, quite a thick and comprehensive document. And there is a lot of work that goes into planning bargaining. What we start with is setting priorities. What do we want to accomplish in our next round of bargaining? And we've already had a good sense because as you wrap your last round, you'll know that you didn't get everything you want. And that's certainly negotiation. It is a compromise. So you will walk away from the table with a deal that's not perfect, but it is a deal that you will live with for the next 2 to 3 years, and then you will go again. So when you create a list, you know that there will be things that you can get, possibly. There will be things you might give up at the table, and then there will be those things you will die for. Part of our team, we certainly always have writers, our top writers. We coerce in many ways to come and join us at the bargaining table. Good meals and good locations. But also, we have 2 lawyers, one for employment law and one for copyright issues. And also because we speak 2 languages in Canada, English and French. And then, of course, we have our staff and we have our researchers. So it's a pretty big group when you start out, at least 10 to 12 people. That's a lot of people to cart around. It's very expensive. And generally, bargaining takes, when you're looking at a list like we're looking at right now, it will be at least 5 to 6 months.
We are not legally allowed to collectively bargain, so how we do it is case by case, producer by producer, project by project. So rather than a build-up for one big contract negotiation, it's something that I have to do all the time, every day, with new people and new projects. Where we come in is that the Film Commission, the New Zealand Film Commission that funds most of the film development in the country, will send the producer to the Writers Guild. They'll say to them, hey, you've got to employ the writer properly. It's easier if you just go see Steve. And the other edge we have is that we're cheap. It is a lot easier for a producer to call me up and go, hey Steve, I need to employ X, writer named X to do this project. Can you, have you got the contracts on your website? They'll go there, they'll download it, they'll fill it in, they'll send it to me. And the negotiation happens between me and that producer before it even goes out to the writer. In New Zealand, we're negotiating with our friends. This is a small industry and everyone knows everyone. So the tricky part is not only getting the terms that we need for the writer, but making sure that it happens whilst preserving the working relationship between the writer and the producer, because at the end of the day, we're going to be seeing them at the same bar as well.
We've had a number of instances where conditions have radically changed because the frequency of episodes or the existence of an omnibus edition has suddenly disappeared, and you have to negotiate the situation where you're basically trying to settle new and fair terms for a job that has fundamentally changed. And another situation which we face, and which I'm sure writers are facing all around the world, and I think we've heard some examples already today, is the increasing amount of work that writers have to do without getting paid and without perhaps even having any guarantee of any kind of commissioned work at all.
We ran a survey last year which was incredibly, for the kind of survey that we run and the kind of reaction that we usually get, was incredibly well subscribed to. A whopping 87% of the people who responded to the survey reported that they had been asked to work for free in conditions where they previously had not ever been asked to work for free before. And this is not just new writers, this is writers of incredible 20 years experience, suddenly encountering instances where they were being asked to do all kinds of things for no money, for free. And they all reported a huge increase in this last few years. Even the most responsible producers are now expecting this as a matter of course. The other side of the problem is that too many of our writers, even our experienced writers, are saying yes to this. They are not, we have guidelines to this, you're not supposed to work for nothing, but our writers are increasingly doing that. That problem again breaks down in two parts. One, the writers who are members of the Guild who should know better who are doing it, partly because they have no other choice, they're being bullied into it, and bully is the right word. The other side of the problem is that only between a half and a third of the writers in UK television are members of the Guild. Now, if you follow this through to its logical conclusion, the only people who will be able to afford to enter and to stay in our business in the UK will be those people who have an unlimited overdraft facility from the bank of mum and dad. Now, in the UK, those people are overwhelmingly white and middle class. So if you really want diversity, you do not increase the barriers of entry into the business to such an extent that you're discriminating against women who tend to be the responsible single parent. You're discriminating against ethnic minorities who will tend not to be in the upper 1%. So you can get at the broadcasters by saying, look, either admit that you don't care about diversity or attack the fundamental financial problem behind it. Very, very large media conglomerates, of whom they are subsidiaries, have never been wealthier. And if those independent broadcasters, if they are short of money because their parent companies aren't paying them enough, then they should go back to those parent companies and demand the money that they need to run the business properly, not try to claw back their losses from the weakest workers, the writers underneath them. We can't demand that our members say no because so many of them are terrified they will never work again if they do. So you need to put together a template for how to say no or how to broach the subject. Many of the people I've talked to in the last 24 hours have faced the same thing. This is something that will become increasingly an international problem as media conglomerates become more and more concentrated. There may only be international solutions to it, and I think we would welcome working with our sister unions on coming up with any idea of how to counter this really pernicious trend.
I got thrown into the deep end very quickly, but the comment I will always remember is one of the studio people saying to us with a totally straight face that writers who write movies based on real events should not be paid as much as writers who write fictional pieces because the events already took place, and so the story, so why should the writer be paid as much as the guy who makes it up from out of his head? But I always like to quote Groucho Marx, who said, "Who needs writers? Give me a competent director and 2 intelligent actors, and at the end of 8 weeks, I'll show you 3 of the most nervous people you ever met." We start out, I mean, it's similar to what Maureen was describing. We actually poll our memberships jointly. We poll our memberships to find out what's on their minds and the issues that they think are important before we go into the MBA. What we discovered this time around was one of the issues we discovered that we hadn't anticipated that became a very major part of our negotiation was this whole aspect of writers of limited run series that run on cable and that have just a few episodes, who were basically being put into contracts where they could not work for anybody else in between these long periods of time where they wait to hear whether or not their shows have been renewed. We then hold a series of committee meetings, either in person or via teleconference between New York and Los Angeles. In those meetings, we vector in on what the central issues should be. And then ultimately, as I said at the beginning of this, we go into that big room and start talking to the AMPTP, which represents more than 350 producing entities. But really, primarily, what you're dealing with are the big monolithic media conglomerates: Comcast, NBC, Universal, Time Warner, Disney, Sony, CBS, Viacom, and now 21st Century Fox. So the first two or three weeks of those negotiations are very much kabuki. And then you get down to the nitty-gritty and you either come up with a deal, as we did this year and 3 years ago, or you go on strike as happened in 2007.
Getting back to this and the development, we are focused on Bibles and concepts, and our overall approach to this will be, if you're asking the writer to invest in the project by not being paid by doing a number of free drafts, then we're now an investor and we want a bigger piece of the back end. And we have been successful in negotiating a provision like this in our feature film section, where we take a slight discount on the script fee, but if it gets produced, and that's a risk, there is a 50% cash bonus. So, I think the theory is that we are now calling ourselves investors, and there has to be some payback along the line. Maybe when it gets produced is too risky, because a lot of things don't get produced. But, it's definitely the producer's job to raise the money. It's the writer's job to write the best script possible. And if we are investing, then we are doing part of the producer's job, and there has to be compensation for that.
It certainly is puzzling that in the European Union, which is supposed to harmonize all these laws, we have a complete range of situations where the collective bargaining is effectively entirely banned in Spain and in the Netherlands, whereas in the UK, we could register as a trade union, we have full legal protection for our bargaining, and even with the worst days of Thatcher and so forth, that right was not taken away from us. How this can happen in a harmonized single market organization is a puzzle, but it does go to show that whoever the European Commission and the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament are working for, it's not the workers of Europe.
But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to teach you one very simple negotiation technique. You okay with that? All right. Okay, this is for uses in cases where you have just been presented with a contract that is complete shit, okay? So, right, I want everyone to stand up. Stand up. You ready? Leave the room. Have a coffee.